Dr. Michael Baltutis, Professor of Global Religions, University of Wisconsin at USA. Dr. Geetesh Nirban, co-convener of webinar on Mahābhārata series. Dear viewers interested in Mahābhārata scholarship, I welcome you all to our webinar series on Mahābhārata, initiated under the project Yoga Consciousness in Mahābhārata and Bhagavad Gita, the ethical value of societal and political well-being, which is taken up under the scheme of scheme for promotion of academic research and collaboration, MHRD, Government of India. Our team for this project includes Professor Vishwa Adluri, Professor of Philosophy, Hunter College, USA, Dr. Joydeep Bagchi, Hindu University of America, USA, Dr. Geetesh Nirban, who is hosting this program now, Kamala Nehru College, Delhi University, Delhi, and me, Professor Bala, from Department of Philosophy, University of Delhi, and we are supported by our young colleagues, Ms. Jayashree and Ms. Anmol, who are research fellows of the project, and we have an extended team of Ms. Deepshika and Ms. Megha, who have been supporting us in this work. Basically, when it comes to the project, let me briefly introduce the aims of the project. Yoga consciousness in Mahābhārata and Bhagavad Gita, the ethical value of societal and political well-being is the broader theme of the project. But specifically, we try to aim to build a new approach to yoga that combines theoretical and practical perspectives as well. And we also attempt to understand yoga beyond a set of postures as an overarching term for salvic practices and to see how it is embedded in social and political reality. We try to reappropriate, in this project, we try to reappropriate texts of classical Hinduism which have suffered from Orientalist approaches in order to articulate the vision of yoga consciousness. And one of the main aims of this project is also to demonstrate how answers to questions of right action at societal and political levels can be explored through the conception of yoga consciousness in Mahābhārata and Bhagavad Gita that transcends sectarian and doctrinal boundaries to create a global system of thought and practice. And we also try to locate or explicate the universal, philanthropic, and humanitarian aspects of Hinduism as echoed in Mahābhārata and Bhagavad Gita. To be specific, we have 3 pointers in this project that we would be dealing with. Yoga consciousness in Mahābhārata and Bhagavad Gita is the first one. And the second one is ethical values of societal well-being. And the third one, ethical value of political well-being. The focus question of the project is to address what is the right course of action for the human being. And all these days, this is the 9th week we are in, or 10th week probably. We had lectures on yoga consciousness, and we also had lectures on social well-being and political well-being. Today, we would be listening to Professor Michael on Indra in Mahābhārata, Vedic, Tantric, Devotional, and Local. One of the important aspects that we must take into consideration when we are dealing with Mahābhārata is that it is not just a text in the literal sense, it is a living tradition. It is being enacted at various places around the country and countries where the influence of Hinduism is prominent. And I lived in a place called Kuppam in Andhra Pradesh, where there used to be an enactment of Mahābhārata for 18 days. The whole village comes together and it celebrates Mahābhārata, and villagers, they come forward and they enact each of the characters of Mahābhārata, which is a visual feast to all of us to watch. So such kind of festivals, though we use the word festival, in fact, it is not festival in that particular sense. It is a kind of becoming one with the tradition. That's what we find. That is how Mahābhārata is still a living tradition in Hinduism. And we have, in fact, when it comes to the character of Indra, we find him in Vedic texts, but we don't find him to be so prominent in epic texts and Puranic texts. But we have evidences of Indra's festival starting from ancient Tamil works, Silappatikaram and Manimakalai. So it would be interesting to listen to Dr. Michael, who would be talking about Indra Jatra. Jatra is festival basically, Indra Jatra. And thank you so much, Michael, for accepting our invitation. And now I request Dr. Geetesh to introduce Michael and take the proceedings further. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Geetesh.
Thank you, Professor Bala, and namaskar to all of you. Good evening to our participants in India and good morning to all in US. Before I go ahead with the formal introduction of our esteemed speaker, I request you all to mute the audio and switch off the video so that we can have a seamless flow of today's session. You are welcome to post your questions in the chat box, and we will try our best to take up as many questions as possible after the address is over. I now take the opportunity to introduce our speaker in formal ways. Dr. Michael Baltutis is Associate Professor of Global Religions at the University of Wisconsin, Oshkosh, USA, where he teaches courses on the classical and contemporary Hindu and Buddhist traditions of India and Nepal. His research includes several articles on the use of royal political rhetoric displayed by the erstwhile king of Nepal during the second Janandolan, that is People's Movement of 2006. He has also published several essays on the transgressive god Bhairava, central to religion, and especially the Maharjan Jati in Nepal. His current research is on the Indra Jatra festival, as it is celebrated both in the epic Mahābhārata and other classical Sanskrit texts and in contemporary Kathmandu. He also serves as the book review editor of the International Journal of Hindu Studies, edited by Sushil Mittal, a position that he has held since 2012. We are really honored to have you amongst us, Dr. Michael. And today, Dr. Michael is going to deliver an address on Indra in Mahābhārata, Vedic, Tantric, Devotional, and Local. Welcome once again, and now I hand it over to Dr. Michael.
Yeah, great.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, we're good right now.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, fantastic. Let me share my screen. And I'm going to do that. That's the message that it was giving me. The host is not allowing participants. Anyways, I'm going to put that out. Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to Delhi University for this talk. Let me move this stuff around. Again, my name is Michael Baltutis. I'm at the University of Wisconsin at Oshkosh. And you heard the introduction. I'm doing work primarily on the Festival of Indra in Kathmandu. As it's celebrated today, I've seen the festival there 4 times as recently as 2018, so 2 years ago. I was scheduled to go there this year, but something happened that's completely disrupted global travel and economy, and I forget what that is, but I'm sure it's affecting you as well. There we go. So the Indra festival is something that, as Dr. Bala has said, we see in different places around South Asia. And it is especially prominent, and to a certain extent, it is only prominent in Kathmandu, Nepal. And it's celebrated in kind of a wide variety of ways, even in Kathmandu. So when we sort of deconstruct the festival in in Kathmandu, we see a number of different layers to it. We see some of the layers that are associated with the classical Sanskrit texts, including, maybe especially including Mahābhārata. We see layers that are associated with the Puranas, the Vishnu Dharmottara Purana and the Devi Purana primarily, the Brihat Samhita of Varahamihira also. There was one time when the first time I saw the festival, I was sitting on the temple steps with my copy of the Sanskrit Brihat Samhita, like watching the festival happening, reading the text, and realizing that these two things, they were exactly the same. The 7th century Sanskrit text and the 21st century festival were performing the same rites. And at that time, I thought, wow, this is a living, unbroken tradition since 1400 years. I now realize it's a little more complicated than that. And what we see in Kathmandu is sort of maybe an 18th, early 19th century revival of the festival that we see in the 7th century texts. But it is faithful to that tradition. And it's sort of amazing to see that it's not an unbroken tradition, but it's still a connected tradition. And it's some of those connections that I want to talk about today, that connect the narratives in the Mahābhārata with what we see in Kathmandu today. All of those layers, there's a royal layer. There's also a local layer or facet of the festival that is connected more to the ancestors than it is to anything in the text, the Sanskrit text of the Mahābhārata. And what we see here in this photograph, hopefully you can all see it, is Indra himself. So this is an image that we see. It is sort of a human-sized icon of Indra, and he is on a low table inside Nasal Chowk, which is the main and most public courtyard inside the royal palace in Kathmandu, Nepal. It's a very unique image. There are no other gods, humans, ancestors, any sorts of beings who iconographically are represented in this way. And I've, for nearly 15 years or so, it's this image that has sort of enthralled me and made me curious about why does Indra look this way? What is the role of this particular icon, this image in the festival? Now, when I ask people on the ground in Kathmandu, and I've done this many times, let's have to do this. When I ask them what that image means, what it refers to, what it symbolizes, what sort of story it tells, the answer that people give me is always the same. And the answer that I am always given is that it is a reference to the story that we see in this image from the Bhagavata Purana. This is the story of the Parijataharana. It's the theft of the Parijat tree by Krishna. And we see Krishna and Satyabhama there in the upper register. And then in the lower register, we see Krishna planting the Parijat tree that he stole from Indra's heaven. And he is now planting it victoriously, as it were, in Braj. And there are some resonances and some similarities here with the Indra festival directly, which is the planting of a tree. The main way that the Indra festival is celebrated is with the raising of a wooden pole. So there are just some narrative similarities there. But what we're going to see later on at the end of the talk, we're going to come full circle to the local Kathmandu version of the story of the Parijataharana. And in that story, that local story, it's reversed. It is in the classical story in the Bhagavata Purana, it is Krishna taking the tree from Indra in Amaravati. And in the Nepalese story, it is Indra who comes down from heaven to earth in order to take parts of the Parijat tree. So this is the answer that people give to my question about this particular image, but I always sense that there was something more to it than just that. The Parijatharana story is important. It is key for helping us to understand the connections between the classical and contemporary traditions, for understanding the connections between the Indra festival and the Mahābhārata. But again, I always felt there was more to it, and this talk is going to unpack some of those connections across text and practice, and between the ancient and the contemporary. And this is another image of Indra at the base of the pole. So in the back of the image, that is the pole itself. That is installed, 40-foot tall pole. And then at the base of the pole, there's another image of Indra, who's in a sort of cage, and he'll be locked in at night. And it's a small, maybe 8-inch tall murti of Indra on his vahana on Airavat. And we see a man from the farmer Maharjan Guti, who is offering flowers and in the process of decorating this image that will remain at the base of the pole for the duration of the festival. Okay, so here's an outline of what I'm going to talk about. The first thing is the Indra festival in the Mahābhārata, and I'll go into some of the detail from the text itself, outlining why it is being celebrated. I'll have number two. The second portion is sort of a transition, an interlude, dealing with the story of Krishna again as Giridhar, as the lifter of Mount Govardhan. And then the third section will be on the Indra festival in Kathmandu, and there will be a couple of subsections there dealing with what I'll call prosaic tantra, a sort of everyday tantra that permeates the religion of Kathmandu. We'll look a little bit at Mahābhārata performances, such as those that Dr. Bala mentioned in both Tamil and Garhwali India. And then we'll conclude with, again, a return to the story of the Parijatharana and see some of the interesting nuances there that will hopefully connect all of these sections. Okay, so opening the University of Chicago English translation from Van Buitenen. He includes as one of many different genealogical family trees that you can find around. I use this one here. And what we're going to start with here is the character of Uparichara Vasu. And Vasu is known for, there are three facets of his character in the epic that I want to unpack here to help us understand what's going on in the first book of the Mahābhārata, Adiparvan, and especially chapter 57. So Vasu is probably most known for being the father of Satyavati, who is the mother of Vyas, and who is, by extension, the patriarch of the entire population of the epic. And I've circled in red there down at the bottom left. That's where Vasu is, sort of in what appears to be in the middle of everything. What I argue actually is that Vasu is sort of himself a sort of patriarch because he's the grandfather of Vyas. And when we open the epic to book 1, chapter 57, we're opening, I argue, to one of the beginnings of the epic. Of course, book 1, chapter 1 is a beginning. There are a couple of other beginnings along the way, but you know, the famous passage about what is contained in the epic is contained elsewhere. What is not contained in the epic is not found elsewhere. That is at the very end of chapter 56. Chapter 57, which introduces the main story, begins with Vasu So I argue, and it's sort of tongue-in-cheek, but it's true that the epic begins with the story of the festival of Indra, performed by the character of Vasu. So it's a story that we have to pay attention to, and I pay attention to it. The second facet of his character, is that he is the king of Chedi, and the theme that the text is concerned with at this point is that of Brahmani Raja, right? It's the proper Brahminical king, and these early chapters, especially chapter 57, one of the beginnings of the epic, spends a lot of time outlining in great detail what it means for Vasu to be a proper Brahminical king. So in terms of scholarship, this connects up to James Fitzgerald, who writes on especially the connections between Yudhishthira and Ashoka. He refers to the double crisis of Dharma, that with Ashoka and his extended patronage of members of heterodox Gnostica sects, Buddhism, Fitzgerald argues that there was a crisis of Dharma among the Brahminical authors, and he says, and this is what I include in number 2 here, I quote Fitzgerald, who says that heterodox movements, such as those promoted and patronized by Ashoka, stood as profound challenges to many pious Brahmins, and these events may well have been a strong stimulus to the creation, development, redaction, and spreading of the apocalyptic Mahābhārata narrative. I also quote in number 3 there, Patrick Olivelle, who says regarding Dharma Shastra texts like Manu, he says that those texts can, quote, best be understood as responses to the continuing effects and memory of the Ashokan reforms. So I see book 1, chapter 57, I see the story of Vasu, I see the story of the first Indra festival within that context. And when we look at Yudhishthira as a literary response to Ashoka, we see Vasu as sort of prefiguring or foreshadowing, looking ahead towards Yudhishthira. All of the very complex issues of Dharma and kingship that we see in Yudhishthira for chapters upon chapters, we see with Vasu at the very beginning. So when we read the story of Vasu at the beginning, we are being introduced to all the complexities of the character of Yudhishthira, who is then a reflection upon what is happening with Ashoka historically. In point number 1 there, I say, or I quote the text early on that says, some Brahmins learned the Bharata from Manu onward, some from Astika onward, and others from Uprichara onward. Uprichara is Vasu. So the text itself acknowledges that the story of Uprichara has been one of the starting points of the Mahābhārata from early on. So even the authors themselves acknowledge the place of primacy and the centrality of the story of Vasu, and again, for my purposes here, the Indra festival. Okay, so a couple of the themes that come up right away. So this is verses 2 through 4, and I've got a couple slides like this where I include the Sanskrit, and I'll read the English. I've underlined in both the Sanskrit and the English some of the key points that we'll pay attention to. So verse 2, the text, the narrator says, Vasu, the son of the Purus, grasped the pleasant area of Chedi at the behest of Indra. He took what was to be taken. Indra met him in person. The king that is Vasu desired to lay down his weapons, perform acts of tapas, and live in an asram. Considering his ability to achieve Indratvam through tapas, Indra gently addressed the king and turned him away from tapas directly. So if we think about Fitzgerald's notion of this double crisis of Dharma, of Yudhishthira as a literary reflection on Ashoka, the crisis that Brahmins might have felt at the patronage of Ashoka, we see some of that here in this initial passage. Vasu defeats, conquers Chedi. He takes possession of it, and then in the wake of that, after he takes possession of it through violent warfare, he says, right, that's it. I'm going to practice ahimsa, I'm going to perform tapas, and I'm going to live in an ashram. I'm going to renounce all of this, right? This, not only does this sound like Ashoka, but it also sounds like Yudhishthira. And Yudhishthira says this, the same thing later on in, I think it's book 11 or 12, where he turns to his rishi and he says, hey, are there any good ashrams I can go live in? And Krishna says, no, you can't live in an ashram. You have to be present here on earth. You have to rule over the people from earth on the ground, not from up in heaven. A couple verses later, this is 7 through 9, this is one of my favorite passages. This is Indra speaking directly to Vasu, and he says, my dear one, Mama Priya, you who are established on earth, you who are Bhuvishta, are a friend of what is established in the heavens. Your country, your desh, is the breast of the earth, Prithivya. Your place is here, O protector of the people. Because of you, this country is filled with wealth and riches more than any other. And then in this very last line, that's the 4th line of the Sanskrit, Indra, ever the poet, he says to Vasu, in sort of playing off of Vasu's name, right? Remember, Indra is Vasava, and he's speaking to Vasu. He says, Vasupurna tsa Vasuda Vasachedi Shuchedipa. He says, O protector of Chedi, live among the Chedis at the place that is full of wealth, the storehouse of wealth, the Vasuda, sort of maybe alluding to the first verse of the Rig Veda with Agni being Ratnadhatama, right? Vasuda. So Indra says to Vasu, again, this is your place. You don't live in an ashram, you live in Chedi, you live in the Desh, you live Bhuvi, you live Prithivya on earth. And you've made this place what it is. You need to reside here. The implication, again, not in an ashram. You're not going to generate tapas like some rishi. Do your job, right? And this definitely resonances to the Bhagavad Gita as well, as Krishna speaks to Arjuna, and he says, perform your dharma. And Indra is giving Vasu a version, I think, of that same argument. The third facet of Vasu's character is what I call ritual innovation. We see Vasu in 3 different places in the text, book 1, chapter 57, which we'll return to in just a little bit. But we also see him in 2 other places. The first one is in book 12, where he is inside the earth, and he is there as a punishment for having improperly ritualized. He has performed some sort of improper ritual or a ritual improperly. And I think the reference there must be to the festival of Indra, which is the previous time that we saw Vasu in book 1. And as he is residing inside the earth, he sort of has a conversion moment, right? And he says, okay, I'm going to do this right. I'm going to perform the correct ritual. And the rituals that he performs there are Vaishnava-oriented puja and Pancharatra-oriented puja. That is the proper ritual that he then performs. The gods lift him out of the earth. They raise him up to heaven, and he earns the name Uparichara, the one who goes up, all right? We see him again and finally in book 14, and probably his most famous appearance with the rishis at Yudhishthira's Ashvamedha, his horse sacrifice. And the different groups of rishis are debating if they should perform the horse sacrifice, which involves animal sacrifice, or if they should sacrifice instead with fruits and roots and seeds, vegetarian offerings. So strangely enough, they sort of resurrect Vasu. They said, we know here's the right guy to adjudicate this debate between us about ritual. It's Vasu, the Chediraja Vasu. So Vasu shows up again, and they say, which one is right? Which one is better? And Vasu says, kind of shrugs his shoulders and says, Yatopa nitair yashtavyam. He says, sacrifice with whatever materials have, whatever you want to do, it's fine. I don't care. Right? To which they immediately send him to Rasatalam for giving him the wrong answer. Right? It's really, he's a strange character who shows up in a couple of strange situations. But in all of these cases, it is a situation where he is either performing ritual or observing ritual or judging ritual. And there's something innovative about what happens, right? In book 12, he switches to Pancharatra Vaishnava, and here he's debating whether the old Vedic rituals are appropriate. Should we perform the Ashwamedh, or should we move on to something a little bit different, essentially accommodating the sort of Ashokan reforms that are promoting ahimsa. In terms of ritual innovation, back to book 1, the Indra festival, and here's a photograph of folks from Kathmandu who are raising the Indra pole into place on the 12th day of Bhadrapad in September. It's a dangerous enterprise. Sometimes it falls down. And this is, again, the first time that we're seeing the Indra festival performed. That's actually way more complex than it seems. Even though the Mahābhārata is the oldest text to contain a reference to the Indra festival, I think that that portion of the text is probably late. And I think that the authors of the epic were probably aware of the later classical festival, but that's probably a conversation for later. But that's the object, generally, that Indra gives to Vasu. So what we see in these two passages here, this is kind of edited from verses 13 to 17. In the English, Indra gives Vasu 3 gifts. These are sort of bribes more than they're gifts, and these are an incentive to have Vasu remain on earth, not renounce the kingdom, not go to live in an ashram, but to remain in Chedi, Bhuvi, Prithvi, Desh, right? All of these terrestrial terms. So as a bribe, Indra gives Vasu 3 gifts. He says, in the heavens is a great crystalline, divinely pleasurable sky-going chariot. It will approach you and it will be given to you by me. The verbs there are verbs of motion, akashagam, right, going, upapatsyape, approaching, moving. The second verse, there are verbs of stability. He says, Indra says to him, among all mortals, you are the only one who has been presented with the boon of this chariot. You will become established in the heavens, uparisto, as if you were a god. Now, Van Boyten in his translations says not you will become established, uparisto, but you will ride there above. He's continuing these verbs of motion, of freedom, that essentially that Vasu will become like a god and can go anywhere. And I don't think that's at all what's happening here. In the very last line, Vaijayanti Malam Yashim Chavarnavim, he also gives Vasu an indestructible flower garland, and not the large 40-foot tall, 15-meter tree, but simply a bamboo pole, right? That he would stick into the ground, and that's the festival. Okay, so the switch from verbs of motion to verbs of stability, I think, are really important. Vasu is not moving around, he's not free, rather he is stable. And I think that's important for this reason. So this is at the very end. I think this is the very last verse of that section. It says, the king was seated, vasantam, on the sky-going crystalline Indra platform, the prasada. As Gandharvas and Apsaras approached the great-souled king, his name was now Raja Uprichara. So what we don't have is Vasu on this chariot, moving around in space, flying around like the gods on their Viman. Rather, what we have is him on a chariot, stable, unmoving, in the center of the world, in between heaven and earth, but not moving, stable. I think of this as not freedom, but as house arrest, right? He is unmoving. He is where Indra wants him to be, and I think that the text tells us this through other stories that are close by. The epic tells us of the story of Jaratkaru's descendants who hang like bats in a cave. In chapter 41, we see Takshaka at the Sarpasatra, who is in between heaven and earth, stuck in the middle. And then even in the Ramayana, we see Trishanku, who is also suspended between heaven and earth. Now, in each of these three cases, there is the image of the being suspended in midair between heaven and earth, holds us, the readers, in suspense. And we ask, what's going to happen, right? It's this great moment where you're waiting for one thing or another to occur. But there's a larger question that's involved in all three of these cases. With Jaratkaru's descendants, there's a discussion over whether one should be a householder or a renouncer. With Takshaka, is there going to be a creation of a new world or apocalyptic destruction of the old? And with Trishanku, is he a human or a god? There's a debate about the nature of the universe, the nature of what it means to be human in this single image of the being suspended in space. And I think that's what we see with Vasu as well. Is he going to be a king who will rule on earth, or is he going to go live in an ashram? And when we keep that discussion, that debate, that dichotomy in mind, as we read the epic, it will inform us about Yudhishthira, right? And Yudhishthira has to make the same choice. Okay. Now, part of that reading of the text comes not only from reading the text, but also thinking about the contemporary Indra festival. So usually when we do this sort of scholarly work, we say, okay, the text is first, and then whatever comes afterwards is caused by the text or informed by the text. And what I'm trying to do is read also backwards. So looking at the Indra festival, so we saw the one image of Indra who is inside the palace, but there are other sorts of images, about 6 other images of Indra that are raised around the old city of Kathmandu in neighborhoods that are managed by farmers, by Maharjan, by Japu. And all 6 of these are raised on these high platforms. And again, what people will say is this is the moment of Indra being arrested, right? He's not flying through the sky, but he is stable, he is caught, he is stuck, he's under house arrest. People will say he's there humiliated for the crime of having stolen the Parijataharana. So when I see Vasu in the text, he's in sort of the same position. He's in between heaven and earth, he's stuck. And it helps me, I think, to understand. I mean, what I'm arguing is that Vasu is being held right under house arrest, being forced into being the king. And I think we have a set of similar images with Indra being stuck between heaven and earth in the Indra festival as well. There's the pole raised, and the text of the chapter 57, towards the end, it provides the benefits to the festival, and it says glory and victory, Shri and Vijay, will come to those kingdoms whose kings perform the Indra festival, as well as abundance, people, and pleasantness. And there's the pole in Kathmandu raised, as we would see it in the 7th century Brihat Samhita and the many Puranas that speak of it as well. Okay. Section 2. I see a lot going on in the comment section. I don't, should we stop for comments and questions, or should I plug through here? What do you think?
No, we'll take up the questions at the end.
Okay.
That would be that.
So the second part of this of my talk is Mount Govardhan, and this will be kind of a short section here. I was looking, I was Googling images of Mount Govardhan, looking for a good one to include in this talk, and there are all sorts of different images from different traditions and poster art, modern poster art images and lithographs. It's great stuff. But what I had a difficulty in finding is an image, even a popular image on Google, that included a visual reference to the cause of Mount Govardhan. In other words, why did, and I'm sure you guys know this, but why did Krishna hold up the mountain, Mount Giridhar, with the pinky on his, I guess that's his left hand? Why did he hold up Mount Govardhan in the first place, right? And why was Indra angry? What's the situation here? Why did the festival for Mount Govardhan eventually come about? And this is one of the few images here, and you can see it in the upper right of the image. There's Indra. He is on Airavat, his white elephant, and he's got his arms out, and he looks frustrated or angry. Right? It's one of the few sort of important references in the Puranas to Indra, and it's again, it's kind of a strange one here. So this is, and I'll just give the English translation here from Edwin Bryan's translation. The narrator says, as he was residing there in Braj with Balaram, Bhagavan Krishna saw the Gopas making preparations for Indra sacrifice, for the Indra Yaga. Bhagavan Krishna is the seer of everything as well as the soul of everything. Despite knowing all about it, Krishna bowed down reverentially and inquired of the elders headed by Nanda. Krishna says, tell me, Father, what is this bustle that has arisen? What is this dhum-dham? Why is this sacrifice, this makka, being performed? From what incentive and by whom? So, a couple references to the Indra festival here, that the villagers, the Brajvasis, were performing on Mount Govardhan. And what's interesting about the text, I really don't have a great answer for this, but the references to Indra's festival are Indra Yaga and the Makka, both words that Makka basically translates as festival, Yaga, sort of derivative of Yagya, of the Vedic sacrifice. But these are words, Yaga and Makka, that the ritual texts of the Indra festival literally never use. They never use these words. It's Maha or Utsava, but the words Yaga and Makka are never used. So I'm wondering here, and it would make sense if these words are sort of derogatory, they're negative terms. Yaga, sort of a reference to maybe an outdated, old, archaic festival that maybe we really don't need to be celebrating anymore. Krishna establishes himself as pure sattva. Indra is established as pure rajas. And then tamas is there, of course, as well, as the foundation of the world. So a couple of references to the Gita there. And there's a great line that Krishna asks as he's holding up the mountain. He says, what's Indra going to do about this? Right? It's sort of this rhetorical question that calls into question, that doubts Indra's power. And there's a reference in the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna asks Arjuna, what good will restraint against your nature do? Nigara kim karishyati, and here he says Mahendra kim karishyati. It's the same sort of form. So he's taking this line from the Bhagavad Gita and turning it against Indra, who he has established as pure rajas. So kind of an interesting take there on the Gita here. So Krishna says, our people do not live in cities, regions, villages, or houses. There's always someone who lives in the woods or in the mountain forests. Therefore, he says to the Brajavasis, initiate a makka to cows, Brahmins, and mountains. Perform this makka with the Indrayaga Sambaras, the very puja items that had been dedicated for the Indra festival. So it's another really great example of ritual innovation, where here it's Krishna who says that yaga, that Indra makka, right? We don't need to perform that anymore. That's for people in cities, right? That's for people like Vasu, who's the king of Chedi. That's not for us. What we need to do is venerate and acknowledge the things around us that are important. We need to adapt and not just perform those old sorts of rituals. Really, really fascinating to me. Again, as someone who studies the Indra festival in a living tradition in Kathmandu, where Krishna had said, "Yeah, well, let's not do this anymore." And of course, the people in Kathmandu have been celebrating this festival for at least several centuries. It's part 3. The Indra festival in Kathmandu. And the first subsection here is this prosaic tantra. It's not my term, but I kind of like it. And again, it refers to a sort of everyday tantra that we see in the religion of Kathmandu. And I quote David Gordon White here as one definition of tantra as an effort to gain access to and appropriate the energy or enlightened consciousness of the absolute Godhead that courses through the universe. And this is done through, as he identifies, techniques of binding and possession, right? How do you gain access to divinity? It's through binding or possession. And there are many examples of this, especially in Nepal, but also in the Himalayas and definitely in other parts of India and South Asia as well. So in one example from the city of Patan in Nepal, there's the Siddhi Tantric Gayabhajya, who binds the goddess Chandeshwari. He puts a wall around her, or he puts her in his sleeve in order to harness her power. In the Garhwali Mahābhārata, there's a great story of Krishna who binds the kind of demon Abhimanyu, right, who is one of the Pandavas, right, the Pandava offspring. But in the Garhwali Mahābhārata, he's sort of a demonic character, and Krishna grinds his bones to dust. He buries him in the ground. And then there's a parallel example to that in Nepal of the Navadurga, the nine Durgas, who look like this. And during, or just after the Dasara Durga Puja festival, they begin to dance. They don the regalia of the mother goddesses, or the Navadurga. That's Kumari on the left. It is Mahakali in the center, who is threatening me with her sword. And then it is Barahi on the right. So these are 3 of the Navadurga. And in their story, they were captured. They were sacrificing people on the edge of town, consuming them, eating them, and until a Siddhi Tantric issued a mantra, chanted a mantra. He made them small, put them in his jhola, took them home, and they danced for him every day. He told his wife, don't go in there, don't go in the room, don't open the door, don't look at what's going on. And of course, one day she did. And the Navadurga said, okay, that's it, we're done. You violated our contract, nothing personal, but we're going back to the forest. In his study of the Navadurga festival, Robert Levy says, he doesn't say that the wife did something wrong, but rather in the narrative that everybody knows, she did something that was really good. He says, through the wife's meddling, an essential transformation takes place, however. The powerful, amoral gods move from the private, personal realm of the Tantric Brahmin to the public space of the city for the use and good of the city as a whole, and for the protection of the traditional ritual and moral life, right? In other words, it was selfish, it was greedy for the Tantric to miniaturize them, to put them in his jola, to take them home, that there was something incorrect about it. And what she does is she allows the Navadurga to be beneficial and auspicious to everybody in the city, as they do when they dance for months, beginning at the festival. So these are some other goddesses, other gods and goddesses who are, so that's binding with the Navadurga. And here is an example of possession, right? Not sort of all out possession or trance, but a sort of ritualized possession in which, again, we have dancers who are donning the regalia of the gods and goddesses. And if you look at the image on the right, we see Bhairav up top in the green mask, and he's got the boy in yellow on one side and the boy in white on the other side. And then the goddess Kumari or Chandi in front of him, the boy in blue, and then the man in white. Their arms are outstretched, and you have people who are guiding them, holding on to them, restraining them as they lead them through the city in order to perform their dance for the good of the public. Right, so this is it's a ritualized possession, which means that there is something tantric involved here, as the city desires to harness the power of these divinities. Alf Hiltebeitel, in his work on the Tamil Mahābhārata performances, talks about, he uses this term which I really like. He refers to a free-floating Mahābhārata folklore, which means that it's not just that the Mahābhārata is a Sanskrit text, but as Dr. Bala said, in Andhra, in Tamil, in Garhwal, there are performances where we see the text come to life. People there might not know any of the Sanskrit of the text, and that's okay. So when Hiltebeitel refers to a free-floating Mahābhārata folklore, he's saying that there are elements, unpredictable elements that are from the epic tradition that are going to show up in these places. So one of the really sort of minor themes, here we have a photograph from one of the neighborhoods where one of the local Indra images is going to be consecrated. So there are themes of thief, of Indra being a thief. In all these traditions, sometimes he steals cucumbers, sometimes melons, and of course, sometimes the parijat flower. We also see elements of one of the common elements of this free-floating Mahābhārata folklore. We see in the Indra festival, where when Indra came down from earth to heaven, from heaven to earth, in order to obtain the parijat, Indra went in search of the parijat flower on his ride Airavat. And this is an image from a local Nepali group that is putting all of the festival narratives into these great animated cartoons. And what we see from William Sachs in his study of the Garhwali Mahābhārata, the Pandav Leela up in Garhwal, he says, Indra's elephant appeared in the square. The men inside it danced wildly for 20 minutes or so. before it was worshipped and then carried off by the 5 Pandavas, right? So Indra's elephant appears in the Pandav Leela, the Mahābhārata performance, where it dances throughout the city. And in the Indra festival in Kathmandu, we have the same thing. And that's the image on the left of Pulukisi, the elephant who dances throughout the city. And he's associated with the ancestors, though you have to dig a little bit to sort of understand how that works. But similar forms, again, in both the Mahābhārata tradition and the Indra festival. Now, this is the one that's really sort of intense. And I see I'm running out of time already, aren't I? Yes. Hiltebeitel refers to epic mythology tied to the locally performed ritual cycle. And one of the things that the stories that he spends some time dealing with is Draupadi. It's the cult of Draupadi, and he's published multiple volumes on this, where she walks over burning coals. And he asks different people, why does she walk over burning coals? And the fourth one is sort of the most interesting answer, where he says that it's Krishna's trick to eliminate those who mourn for those killed in battle. And there's sort of an allusion, I think, he doesn't say this, but to Sri Parvan, where you see all the women wailing at the river at the sight of the husbands and fathers and sons who have died. So the question, why does Draupadi walk over burning coals in the Tamil performance, is that it's Krishna's trick, this sort of a leela, but it's a weird sort of leela, just to eliminate all of the mourning. And what we see in the Indra festival is that there's a very similar story of Indra's mother who, and here she is late at night. This is probably 1 a.m. She's leading all of the men in white shirts there are the heads of their households in which a person has died that year. They go on a procession throughout the city, and she leads them after the procession outside the city, outside the Kathmandu Valley, and she abandons the souls of the deceased, and she goes up to heaven. It's a very, it's eerie, right? And it's not just Leela, like playing a trick on somebody, but it's saying the souls of we're not going to take care of the souls of the dead. We're going to leave you all here at this lake outside the city so that Indra's mother can go up to heaven. And there's a really interesting parallel there with the Mahābhārata tradition, where we see ancestors worshipped in various forms. I'm going to kind of cut through a little bit of this. This is another really close connection to the Mahābhārata story, where Akash Bhairav, he's the blue guy on the left, whom I've written a little bit about. His story is connected directly to the Mahābhārata. He participated in the war at Kurukshetra until Krishna cut off his head and sent it sailing back to Kathmandu. His head, that particular mask, it resides in the upstairs of a temple, the Akash Bhairav temple, and during the 8 days of the Indra festival is brought down to a small structure where worship is performed for him every day. So another connection directly to the story of the Mahābhārata. And here we have the icon of Indra himself, and here there are resonances with again the Mahābhārata tradition in Tamil Nadu, where the sort of demon, real sort of a Bhaira figure, Aravan, possesses the same figure. And this is something I really just recently found out about, looking through Hiltebeitel's book called Freud's Mahābhārata. He's got images, photographs of Aravan, who is worshipped there. And he also, Hiltebeitel asked people, why does he have this form? Why is he sitting there with his arms outstretched? And he says, people say he's a mighty warrior going to war, or that he is a dancer. Indra clearly is a warrior, but again, he also has the same sort of outstretched arms as his mother, who is in charge of the ancestors, who is in charge of the Maharjan farmers. There's this really complex sort of symbolism going on and connections to, again, many different layers of the Indra festival, and as well as the Mahābhārata, both the Sanskrit tradition and of the local performances in Tamil Nadu and Garhwal. I see it's already 10 o'clock, so I'm going to stop there, and we can take questions. And
thank you so much. And now I hand over the proceedings to Dr. Geetesh. Dr. Geetesh.
Thank you, Dr. Bala. Thank you, Dr. Michael. So we heard on Indra, the Parijat flower, the Indra Jatra, in its Vedic, Tantric, and devotional nuances, with its understanding rooted from Vedic to Mahābhārata times. This has been a very interesting and engaging talk. The visuals presented were religious and aesthetic delight for us on a Saturday evening in India, with innumerable references on the topic of your address, as well as the direct verses that you quoted, are a kind of a rich collection for quite a lot of younger scholars to work upon. Dr. Michael, you've given the budding scholars a lot to read and reflect upon. On behalf of Professor Bala, our whole Spark team, consisting of Megha, Jayashri, Anmol, Deepshika, and all the fellow participants, Department of Philosophy, University of Delhi, as well as Kamala Nehru College, I thank you for sparing time on a Saturday morning for us. It's been a real delight to have you with a very interesting lecture on Saturday, 8th of August. Thank you for being with us. I now request all the participants to switch on the videos so that we can have photographs, the pictures for our record. Dr. Michael, you have to unmute yourself. Jeshri, can you unmute Dr. Michael, Dr. Bala?
Thank you.
Yeah,
Sorry.
you can unmute everybody, whoever wants to speak, whatever can. I will start with the pictures now. I request all of you to wear a smile Saturday morning and Saturday evening. I'm on page 1 right now. Page 2. I request all the participants to switch on your videos. I'm on page 2 still. Once again on page 1. Thank you, Dr. Michael. Thank you, Professor Bala. Thank you, all the participants, for being with us. We look forward to having you again on the coming Saturday. In fact, on all the Saturdays in the month of August. Good night from India, and there, good morning and a wonderful day ahead, Dr. Michael. Namaskar.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you so